Our banking system is sound.
In the past 2 weeks, serious difficulties at a small number of banks have emerged.
These banks are safe.
All depositors' savings in the banking system are safe.
The banking system in the United States is sound and resilient.
Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound and resilient.
A rough week for the banking industry.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, the second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
The Silicon Valley Bank collapse is the worst since 2008.
Social Security is structurally sound.
As president, I will not cut one penny from Social Security or Medicare.
There's an imminent disaster waiting. I mean, that's where we're headed.
2 balls, 2 strikes to Bryce Harper. Suarez delivers. Swing and a drive. Left field. It's deep. It's going. Yes! And it is gone. Yes! It is bedlam at the bank as Bryce Harper has put the Phillies on top.
Thank you for tuning in to podcast number 10 of Bogus Banks, Behemoth Bubbles, and Baseball Betting. I'm your host, Chase Goldman, and today is Sunday, December the 14th, 2025. So I just want to go back. I'm going to go the very fastest Cliff Notes version in case this is your first podcast that you're listening to. I'm going to run through this as fast as I possibly can, and that would be the entire concept of this conspiracy trade that I am literally just up to my neck in, and I think I'm going to clean up. So, first of all, I do believe that the world is run by witches. Now, I know that might sound crazy to y'all, but that's what I believe. And I would encourage anybody who is not familiar with that concept, please, I beg you, please go back and listen to my podcast number 5, where I detail just tons of weird things that have happened in this world. And they were written about in movies or books before they happened. Big world events like the Titanic. So, the conspiracy trade. It starts on Fox with Bart to the Future. The air date on this was March the 19th, 2000. Now, just to go back and let everybody know, if you ask any of the chatbots, whether it's Gemini or ChatGPT or Grok, ask them, are 1s and 9s important in witchcraft? And they will all tell you the same thing. Yes, they are. And what we'll see is that we keep seeing these combinations of 1s and 9s all over the place. If you go back and you look at by a landslide, the 2 biggest world events of my lifetime were 9/11 and COVID-19. Both of them incorporated the 1 and the 9. 9/11 and COVID-19. Okay, the 1 and the 9. Right there it is. It's very ubiquitous. It's everywhere. In this episode of The Simpsons, Bart to the Future, the air date on this, again, was March the 19th. There's your 1 and your 9 of 2000, 25 years ago. So in this episode, Lisa Simpson is being inaugurated president. And she's making her inauguration speech, and she says, thanks to the economic disaster left behind for us by President Trump. And then she says, how bad is it, Secretary Van Houten? And Milhouse comes out onto the stage carrying a chart of a crashing stock market, and he says, we're broke. So right now the United States government is clearly bankrupt and broke. The wealth of the people still remains in their homes and in their stock market portfolios. And once they take that away, then the entire country is completely broke. And that's going to happen. I think the witches have a plan. They've told us in their World Economic Forum that by 2030, we will own nothing and we'll be happy. Now, the guy who started the World Economic Forum is a guy named Klaus Schwab. I'm sure most of you hopefully have heard of this guy by now. I'm convinced this guy's a witch. And there are pictures of him. If you Google image that guy, you'll find pictures of him wearing what looks like some kind of weird Star Trek uniform. I mean, normal people don't dress up this way. And I'm totally convinced that's some kind of sorcery he's doing there. So anyway, on to the trade. We've got those 2 things. By 2030, we're all going to be broke and penniless. And by 2030, we're also, by the end of Trump's term, we're also going to be broke. Okay? Those 2 things, I believe, are going to happen. They've cast some kind of spell, and I think they're going to take the wealth of the people. There's no better way to control a population than to take their wealth. So that's what I believe. So let's go on to the conspiracy trade. October the 28th. Andrew Ross Sorkin, who, anytime I see somebody that's rich or famous and they're a member of Club OJ, that raises an eyebrow with me. Okay, I'm not saying that everybody that's in Club OJ is in on it. That is a ridiculous story, but it is amazing how many people in positions of prominent power are members of Club OJ, from Alan Greenspan to Ben Bernanke to Janet Yellen. I mean, it's a list. Steve Leisman, Jim Cramer, Andrew Ross Sorkin. I mean, it is a very, very long list of people. People with powerful, microphones, whether it's Howard Stern, positions of power. They've got a lot of positions of power. And I'm not saying it's some big giant conspiracy, but at the very end of the day, I do think that there are a lot higher percentage of witches with those people. That's just what I think. So, and when I say those people, I'm talking about members of Club OJ that are also in the spotlight or a very, very position of power, like Claudia Sheinbaum, for example, the president of Mexico. So let's move on. Andrew Ross Sorkin rings the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange on October 28th. Andrew Ross Sorkin is standing in front of a massive, giant sign about a stock market crash. Now, to me, that's kind of like, I'm going to scratch my head on that anyway. But the stock market crash was about the 1929 stock market crash. And the reason he was doing this, their cover story for all of this, and maybe it's just all organic, who knows. But he rings the bell on October 28th, standing in front of this sign about a stock market crash because he's promoting his book. He has a new book out about the 1929 stock market crash. So he's promoting his book and he rings the bell on October 28th. Now, that stock market crash in 1929 occurred during the month of October. So there's a October 29, 10/29. The very next day, after he rings the opening bell on the New York Stock Exchange, we see a high in the S&P 500 that has not been breached to this day. That high was 6,920. That was the intraday high in the S&P 500, and it was hit on October 29th, another 10/29. Now, see, I don't think that's a coincidence. I know most people will. Please go back and listen to my podcast number 5. I beg you. 10/29. So I see that, and that was enough to get me in the trade. But I went into it big, but I didn't go all in. But I went big on the trade. And then, I live in Puerto Rico. I have a home in Puerto Rico, and I have a home in Texas. And I flew from my home in Puerto Rico to my home in Texas for the winter. And so I'm still waking up super early because there's a 2-hour time difference between Puerto Rico and Texas in the wintertime. So I am still waking up at the crack of dawn, or I was a few weeks ago. So the morning was November the 18th. And remember, they like to encode these 1s and 9s in everything they do. So that was another encoded 9/11, okay? Because you had the month 11, November, and the day was the 18th. 1 plus 8 is 9. So there's an encoded 9/11 on this date. Now I wouldn't think anything of that, but I turned on I was just curious. Does CNBC have programming this early in the morning? So I grabbed my iPad, I opened up Fubo, I turned on CNBC, and sure enough, there's Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin on the set of CNBC. And they have a guest on the show. His name is Oz Perlman. He is from Israel. And he's waving around a copy of the 1929 book about the stock market crash. Wow, that got my attention. So I watched the entire presentation. The guy who is the guest on the set, his name was Oz Perlman, and he's written a book that he's promoting. And he is a mentalist. Now, most people would probably refer to him as a magician. I would call him a sorcerer or a witch. Regardless of what title you go with, that's what he does. He is a magician. So he comes in there and he says, he looks at Andrew Ross Sorkin and he says, I always like to think of, if we knew the beginning and we knew the end before it happened, what would you do, Andrew, if you had known that October 24th was going to be the day the stock market crashed? And so Sorkin says, well, I would have, shorted the market and made a lot of money. So then he goes on and he says, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. He hands, first of all, he says, okay, I always say that we need to know a date or something, and he points at Kernan and he says, what I want you to do is pick a year, any year in the next 10 years. So Kernan picks 2027. Then he looks over at Sorkin and he says, I want you to pick a day. And he picks July 6th. So then he grabs a marker and a piece of white poster board and he writes down 7/06/27. But he does not write down a 0 in front of the 7, just 7/06/27. So then he hands each of them a book. He hands Kernan a copy of the book that he's promoting, that he wrote, Oz Perlman's book, and he hands Andrew Ross Sorkin a copy of his book about the 1929 stock market crash. He says, what I want you to do is open your book, thumb through it, and find the page that is calling your name. So they do that, and he says, and then I want you to hold that page close to your body. So they each open up a paperback book, and they're each holding their paperback book open with the open page against their chest. He says, okay, now Andrew, I want you to make note of the first word on your page and remember it and close the book. So he does that. And then he goes to Kernan. He says, I want you to make note of the last page on your book and close it and remember it. So he does that. And there again, there's that first and your last. There's your 1 and your 9. Beginnings, endings, right? 1 and 9. These are very important numbers. In fact, Jesus said, it's in the Bible a couple times, I think, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Does that tie into this? I got a feeling it probably does, but when I read the whole chapter that was in, it didn't make any sense to me, but maybe it will later on. So anyway, he says, now what I want you to do is, because you guys have each done the first and the last, there's Oz Perlman, the magician again, making a big issue of the first and the last. He says, because you've already done the first and the last, I want you guys to each pick a letter from the middle. And then I'm going to count down from 3, and I want you to each say your letter. So he goes 3, 2, 1, and then they both say the letter G at the same time. And then they look at each other and they look real puzzled. So then he says, now here's a piece of poster board. He gave them each a piece of poster board and a marker. And he says, now I want you to each write down your word. Sorkin, you write down the first word on your page. Kernan, you write down the last word on your page. So they each, but don't let each other see it. So they each write it down. And he says, all right, let's turn them around and see what you got. And they both had the word legal written down on their posters. And then they look real surprised again. So then he says, the magician, Oz Perlman, says, he holds up his poster board, and it says 7/06/27. Now, one thing that I want to point out about witchcraft and Satanism is they like to invert things. They like to twist things around so that the truth can be lies and the lies can be truth. That's why you see Ozzy Osbourne with an upside down cross, because it's inverted. And that's why you heard back in the 80s that if you play the rock songs backwards, there would be satanic lyrics on them. Probably true. But that's the way the Satanists, they reverse things. So he takes his poster board that says 7/06/27 and he turns it upside down, and now it says legal. So all 3 of the poster boards say legal. Now, what I read into that, initially I thought, well, I bet they're going to, because it's legal now, they're going to do bail-ins on the banks instead of bailouts. But after I got to thinking about it, no, I think what it might be is that this round tripping of revenue, which is the AI bubble, they're going to label it vendor financing, and they're going to say it's legal. I don't know. We'll find out. But I do think that what they're telling us there is the market peaked on October 29th, 2025. It's going to bottom on July 6th, 2027. And I'm expecting that to be about a 90% drawdown from top to bottom, at least on the NASDAQ, probably the S&P 500. Because this bubble, this is the biggest bubble humanity's ever seen. When you combine housing, crypto, and the stock market, they're going to take all that wealth from the people. And then, just like Milhouse said, we're all going to be broke. That's the only thing missing, because the government's already broke. Now, if the people are broke, they can control everybody. So that's what I think is going to happen. But I do think that the AI bubble is definitely popping. So Wednesday, the Fed came in and surprised everybody. They had announced at their last FOMC meeting that they were going to end quantitative tightening, which they did on this, I guess November 30th was their last day of QT. And when they came in on their meeting on Wednesday, they said, oh, by the way, we're going to start up quantitative easing on Friday. They're going to have to buy $40 billion of T-bills every month. Now, for a T-bill market and a T-bond market that's so great and wonderful and there's never a problem with it, why do they need to do this? Well, there's something going on that we're not being told. And I think that bond market is probably the most fake market that has ever existed in humanity. I still don't understand who in their right mind was loaning money to the U.S. government back in 2020 for 0.5% interest. Let me put that in perspective. You loan me $10,000 today, and a year from now, I'll pay you $50 for the use of your money, and you don't get it back for 10 years. $50. You can't even take a family of 4 to Chipotle for $50 anymore. So, it never made sense to me. And this was, weeks and months after the Fed had just literally printed $4 trillion out of thin air on their balance sheet. They just, if people didn't understand that was going to cause inflation, I don't know what they were thinking. So, it's very simple. All governments need financing. And there's 2 ways they can do it. They can do it the right way, which is to go to the people and say, hey, we have this great idea. We're going to spend money on this project or that. And because of that, we're going to need to raise taxes. That's the right way to do it, because then the people, there's a system of checks and balances, and the people can say, no, I don't want to pay that tax to do that. And you can have some pushback. But when the U.S. government does it, they never raise taxes. So what they do is they borrow the money instead. And as long as there's somebody willing to lend them the money, like the United States has been this sweet spot because we have the reserve currency of the world, you can get away with that for a very long time without prices going through the roof. But what eventually happens is you run into a situation where nobody wants to loan the government money anymore. And I think that's where the Fed is now. That's why they're going to start buying another $40 billion a month of T-bills. And that's because they can't find anybody to loan money to the government. That's what I think. And what that is we have a constant supply right now of goods and services in the economy, but now we're going to be increasing the amount of dollars in circulation through quantitative easing. What's that going to do? We're going to increase the number of dollars. We're going to keep the goods and services constant. That means you've got more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services. What's that going to do? That's going to raise prices, and everybody's going to see inflation. But your average American is too dumb to figure out that this is how it works. It's called the inflation tax. So they just continue to get away with this. But let's go on. I think the AI bubble is popping, finally. And the reason I say that is because quantitative easing, you would think that the NASDAQ and the stock markets would love that, because that's going to probably, you would think, cause all these asset prices to increase. But what happened was Wednesday night, Oracle reported earnings, and they increased their CapEx guidance. Now, to put this in perspective, this company borrowed $18 billion during the quarter. They finished the quarter with $19.2 billion, which means without that loan, they would have had $1.2 billion in their checking account. And they were cash flow negative to the tune of $10 billion in the quarter. Okay? So normally, 6 months ago, if they would have came in with that and they would have increased their CapEx guidance, they now say they're going to spend another $50 billion over the next 6 months on AI infrastructure, what they call compute. If they would have announced that 6 months ago, the NASDAQ would have loved it. We would have been on to new highs in Oracle, but not this time. This time, Oracle got beaten down for 13%. In fact, remember I talked about it about a month ago, when Oracle reported earnings the last time, they were touting $320 billion of remaining performance obligations. And the stock went up 20% in the after hours that night. But not this time. Now the market is suspicious, and they're not clapping seals anymore. Now they're asking questions, I guess, because Oracle went down $13 billion or 13%, and from that high, from their last earnings report to the close on Friday, they have lost $403 billion of market cap. So that's a pretty good clue that maybe this AI bubble is popping. But what really did it for me was Thursday night, Broadcom reported earnings. And now that's over $1 trillion market cap. I think it's 1.9 before this Friday. But they reported earnings, and their margins contracted by 1%. I think their margins went from 68% to 67%. And I'm telling you, 6 months ago, that stock would have been up 10% on that. Oh boy, this is great. AI, yes, yes, yes. Nope, not this time. Broadcom went down 10% on Friday, which is, I'm thinking their market cap before that was 1.9 trillion, I want to say. So that's $190 billion in market cap that just vanished on Friday. I think the AI bubble's done. A couple other reasons I would say that. I just heard on a podcast this afternoon, actually, that NVIDIA is claiming that they have sold 6 million AI GPUs. The problem is that would eat up 10 to 12 gigawatts of power, and we have not built anywhere near that many data centers worth of compute. So, and then that clicked with me, and they brought it up on the podcast I was listening to. Michael Burry has also, I saw this tweet this week. He's basically offering, I think, a cash reward for anybody that can come up with a picture of one of these warehouses that has all these idle, AI chips just sitting around. In fact, the Microsoft CEO has admitted that they've got a bunch of chips just laying around that they can't use because they're power constrained, is what he said. But they bought all the damn things, and by the time they find the power to use them, they're going to be worthless because there's already a mismatched depreciation schedule where the chips are really only going to last a couple years, but they're saying they'll last 6, and they're doing a straight line depreciation on that at 18% a year. So this thing has got disaster written all over it as far as I'm concerned, and it all hinges on OpenAI. Now, if Oracle comes in and announces they're going to cut their CapEx spending plans, guess what? OpenAI implodes. It's done. I mean, this whole thing is just completely, it's going to blow up overnight. In fact, OpenAI is going to have to borrow more money. I mean, there's no two ways. They've got to raise more money. Who's going to give it to them now? I mean, Sam Altman, in that presentation with that investor about a month ago, what did he say? The investor said, hey, Sam, how are you going to spend $1.4 trillion on all this infrastructure when your annual run rate of revenues coming out of this year is at $20 billion a year? And I just don't see how they're going to come up with, $1.4 trillion is what he was basically asking Sam. And Sam says, look, I can find somebody to buy your shares. Enough. And I'm like, what did I just see? And then in the last week or two, we've seen another one of the AI bros, Alex Karp, who's also a member of Club OJ, along with Sam Altman. Alex Karp is being interviewed by Andrew Ross Sorkin, and he could not sit still. He was all jumping around. It was like he coked out of his mind or something. And these are the people that need to go raise capital? I just don't see it happening. How can anybody acting in terms of a fiduciary responsibility to their investors give these guys any money? I think the bubble is popping. I think AI is just it's a marketing phrase. That's what it is. I mean, the problem with AI is we still to this day don't have any end users using AI to make money. That's the whole problem. Not just that, but they've built data centers. I heard about 2 of them up in Oregon. They can't even get electricity. They built the damn data centers, called the electric company, and the electric company's giving them the middle finger. No, we're not going to hook you up to our grid. So, this thing is such, in my opinion, the biggest disaster. But I'm short up to my eyeballs. I shorted even more on what day was that? I think it was maybe Thursday. No, I've been tapped out. I've been maxed out on my short position for over a week. I think it was the Friday before last. But I expect these markets to drop 90%. I think the bottom will be on July the 6th, and they're going to take the relative people. So that's today's podcast. I appreciate you guys listening, and we'll be back with podcast number 11. Thank you.